They get a phone call not more than 30 minutes later, and it was MTV. MTV said, hey, can you guys be here in 2 days to record an episode for Total Request Live? My name is Ulf Oesterle, and this is my studio story. I think throughout my entire career in music, I've been someone who has been that connector. And my first real dive into working with music happened back in the late 90s when I was a college student, and my sister was a freshman at Syracuse University. She had some friends that started this punk band, and I was down at SUNY Cortland running the radio station. And she basically said, I know that you know a lot more about music and maybe you can help these guys. And that was my first step into working with music, where we took over a South Campus apartment, recorded a short little EP, and started touring from Baltimore to upstate New York. And that happened because my sister knew this band and I was sort of the connection to my sister. From there, I moved on to working with the Syndicate, a marketing and promotion company based in Weehawken, New Jersey. And I started handling upstate New York events for major label bands. And through that, I started to get connected to the Central New York music scene. And that role of connector has been something that's followed me throughout 25 plus years working in music in Central New York. Because I was working with those major label bands, I started to really run into bands that were developing their own sound and their own presence here in Central New York. And at one point, I was working for this band Stage. They were on Maverick Records, which was Madonna's record label back in the day. And Stage had been coming through to play Syracuse quite regularly. And I was there for all of the marketing beforehand. I was there for day of show, and running around the venue were all these Central New York bands, one of which was the band Merit. And Will Meekum, who is the bassist of the band, saw me and he's like, hey, we got to get together. We have to, sit down, have some pizza, have some lunch, and we want to talk about doing a record. And at that point, they wanted to do an EP. And when we sat down for lunch, I convinced them an EP was not the way to go. Let's do a record. And that record actually turned into the very first project that I ever did with O Records, a record label that I started here in Syracuse. And we recorded that at SubCat when SubCat was located in Skinny Atlas. And that was my first big step into releasing music. And again, I felt that connection role because I was working for these major label bands. I was working for the Syndicate. And now I'm starting to connect with everyone that was in Central New York. And by releasing music, I really started to get those connections to promoters, to other artists, and then to larger music companies throughout the US and abroad. While I was releasing music early on, I started my record label in 2003. I was also doing a PhD up at Syracuse University. And with that particular era of time, I had the opportunity to link up with so many big-time speakers that were coming through on campus at Syracuse. We're talking people like John Sykes, who was one of the founders of MTV. Phil Quadraro, who just passed, but he was this major music executive. People like Rob Light, who is one of the partners at Creative Artist Agency. I mean, these were the people coming through on a regular basis. And you started to see what they were doing. And that was the early stage of launching what ended up being the biggest career move for me, teaching in the band year program at Syracuse University. This was a very specific music business major that we developed with the help of these partners. My role was really to interact with the music business of New York, Nashville, Los Angeles, and I would visit all of our students at their internships. So my connections to the music industry grew exponentially as I was doing all of this travel. And I think that's something that really helped build the network of contacts that I had to really support the bands that I was working with over time. I had a really big opportunity in 2008 because I built several years of success with some of these Central New York bands. And this pop punk band from Syracuse that had been playing basements started to get a little heat. And by, sort of the luck of the draw, they came to me because they lost several hundred of their CDs that they had printed. There was a breakup in the band, and they ended up in somebody's trunk, and the car got impounded. And so here's a band with a little bit of buzz and an era where selling CDs was your lifeline. And they didn't have any more CDs to sell. So the band Honor Bright came to me and they said, would you be interested in putting out this release, reissuing it for us on your label? I said, absolutely, as long as we can add a couple new songs. And we changed some of the packaging and called it the Deluxe Edition. And now this band started to really take off. They went on and followed Warped Tour and ultimately got to play Warped Tour. And I distinctly remember right after getting off stage in Buffalo, New York, after they'd played, they get a phone call not more than 30 minutes later. And it was MTV. MTV said, hey, can you guys be here in 2 days to record an episode for Total Request Live? It was amazing. And, those experiences of playing Warped Tour and then getting to go play TRL, which was literally what people watched from 3:30 to 5 o'clock or so after coming home from school. I mean, it was the pop music show. Eminem and every other, huge star. I throw Eminem out there because I feel like that was one of those big stepping stones for him. But that was what people were watching. And now this little band from Syracuse got to play that. And so through these experiences, the connections to industry was really, really strong. And I feel like I've held those connections throughout the last 25 years because a lot of the alumni that I had while teaching at Syracuse University for 19 years, they're now running the show. You've got people like Gabs Landman, who is, signing artists. She works in publishing. Amy Allen was one of her, signings that she was so proud of early on. And Amy's written so much for Tate McRae, who I think is going to be the biggest pop star in the world. So, people like Alex Kozlov doing amazing work. All these alums make me really proud, and I'm proud to have those connections. And I think that's been a common theme throughout the last 25 years or so of me working in music. So recently, I've had one of my favorite experiences, and that's sort of playing in the intersection of sports and music. I've had one opportunity to work with sports and music in the past, and that was managing Mike Powell. I mean, arguably the best lacrosse player to have ever played the game, and I think arguably one of the best singer-songwriters and storytellers to have ever existed. His events and concerts, amazing. And I feel very fortunate to have helped put out an EP with him, record a double live album, and be a part of his growth for a couple of years. And that first intersection was definitely more music than sports. But this latest iteration of playing in the sandbox that is sports and music has been with the Syracuse Crunch. And I have known the Crunch forever. My former father-in-law was one of the folks involved in really supporting the Crunch 30 years ago when they came to Syracuse. Ed Cochin was the deputy county executive here in Syracuse for something like 30 years, 33 years. And, an institution. He's got a building named after him in downtown Syracuse. And the Syracuse Crunch have been here for 30 years. This is, sort of that 30th anniversary. And I've known a lot of the front office folks for a long time. And I got a call from Jim Sorosi this year, and he said, hey, couldn't we get together? I've got a project that I think you might be interested in. Now, Jim and I have worked together in the past. When the Syracuse Crunch did their first outdoor hockey game, at that point, the largest outdoor game in AHL history, they needed an anthem singer. And I helped bring in Jessie James Decker, and she absolutely crushed it. Another connection there, her current manager was building out her MySpace page at that time. And so those connections still run really close. But Jim and I have worked together in the past, and so I knew when I get a call from him, something fun is happening. And I came into the office and, I sat down with him and Megan from the Crunch, and they said, the guys want to go record some music. And we were talking about doing a holiday song, and they initially had some other songs in mind, and not the 12 Days of Christmas that we did. They wanted to do some other music, and I suggested that maybe we shy away from that right now because of licensing issues. And My educational background allows me to lay out what you can and can't do with other people's music. And ultimately, we settled on the song. The guys had a blast. They'd never been in a pro recording studio before, and I explained to them as they were coming in, this was the studio that I set up for Future when he was recording in Syracuse working on a Drake record. And that was the song Grammys that was finished here in Syracuse. I got the call from the label, said, we need a studio. Can you help make this happen? And I was happy to make that a reality. And so for the players to come in to see the studio, to get the tour, to recognize, okay, the A room versus the B room, go down to the basement and check out the instruments that SubCat has. I mean, for them, it was absolutely eye-opening. And you could see them truly enjoying the experience because they kept pulling out their phones to send snaps and, create content on social media, and just had a grand old time with this. And that first song was a success. So the Crunch came back and said, can we do a couple more? And so I've been able to take some of those connections that I've had over the years, people like Chris Eves, who is an absolutely amazing musician, Joe Altier, absolutely incredible, both career musicians, to bring them into the studio to help lay down the vision that we have for these songs. And then we bring the Crunch players through to do the vocals. That would not have happened if I wasn't someone who got to play this connection role. I'm not out there in a real big social setting connecting with people. I don't go to the bars. I don't go out to dinners. I don't do any of that. My connections all remain within this tiny sphere that is the music business. That's the sandbox that I play in, and I'm really, really thrilled that I get to play that role and help take people's visions and make them a reality.